So this panel actually is focused on business aspects and also career in IoT. And we have a great panel with experts in the IoT industry. And yeah, we have here, I'm going to introduce now each panel. We have Renil Paramel. We also have Douglas Humphreys and Alan Masser. A short biography for each of these panelists. Renu Parimal is a vice president with Gartner with over 20 years of experience, including 18 years of management consulting experience, serving clients in business and technology divisions of various Fortune companies. Based in Santa Clara, Mr. Paramel advises C-level executives in solving problems and providing strategic recommendations related to IoT, technology governance, operating model, technology portfolio management, technology strategic planning, M&A, technology integration, risk assessment, and also technology assessment. Mr. Paramel also has prior experience successfully setting up a software development business, and also he co-founded a multimedia startup that focused on music and singing for South Asians. He graduated from University of Mumbai with a Bachelor of Engineering degree in computers, and he also earned an MBA from University of Pittsburgh with an emphasis in marketing and systems. Prior to joining Gartner over 8 years ago, Mr. Paramel worked at Accenture and Deloitte for several years. Our second panelist, it's Mr. Douglas Humphrey. Douglas is cybersecurity, should change the slide. Douglas is the cybersecurity lead for HP Enterprise Universal IoT platform, where he helps design solutions for smart cities. He is also a member of the IoT Architecture Working Group. Prior to joining HP in Palo Alto, he was director of product development at Spheric Security, a situational awareness startup, and led cybersecurity software development at eBay. Douglas was sponsored by HP to study management and technology at Stanford University and earned an MBA in finance from Columbia Business School. Previous, he was co-founder and CFO at asthecompany.com, an investor relations startup serving high-technology companies. Douglas was also an investment banker at Wall Street firms, including Goldman Sachs and Deloitte, for over 10 years. In his spare time, he has been a founding member at the new SJSU Center for Cyber Risk Studies and serves on the boards of several cybersecurity startups. And our last but not least panelist, it's Dr. Alan Masser. He has been a worldwide leader in advanced software and intelligence services for connected consumers for more than 20 years. Currently, he's working on a stealth startup, but previously, Alan was Vice President of Software and Innovation and also CTO of Global Connected Car Experience at General Motors, where he led GM's work on products, platforms, and future technologies for the connected car and services. Before General Motors, Alan was Vice President of Advanced Software Technology at Samsung Electronics, covering IoT, intelligence, privacy, mobile social media, content delivery, and cloud services. Alan has also worked at a variety of other consumer electronics companies, including HP, Sony Electronics, and also startups. Alan also serves on numerous industry organizations, board of directors, and also with analysts and media. So we have a great lineup of panelists today, a lot of interest certainly in the IoT. And what we have asked the panelists is to prepare a short presentation to address some of the questions. We talked about IoT And some of the presentation, for example, in these past 2 days mentioned that maybe 70% of the activities in IoT do not really make any money yet. So is there a hype around IoT, or actually it's different? We also ask the panelists to look at what IoT, talk about what IoT means for their organization, what are the main challenges to IoT adoption, and what are the applications for IoT and how is that impacting the employment. So in the order of that we introduced, I will ask now Renil to come first and present his perspective.
Thank you, Rozalia. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me to be here. I've put together a few slides to kind of talk through some of these questions that Rozalia has put together out here. So for those of you who do not know Gartner, we're kind of the world's largest research firm. We also provide a lot of advisory services to our clients. We have about 2,000 research analysts who follow a variety of topics, and we publish a lot of reports that's used by the industry. We do have a dedicated group of analysts who follow the IoT space really closely. I myself am part of the management consulting side, where we help clients who need more help than just looking at the research reports that we publish. So I'm hoping to bring some perspective today from that angle for y'all. So the first question around hype. So I'm sure you probably have seen this quote several times from Gartner that by 2020, there's an anticipation that roughly 20 billion IoT devices are going to be connected. And interestingly, we actually use a tool called the Hype Cycle, which you probably have seen in various research formats to kind of track this area. And for IoT, we've been, I think this is the 5th year that we have published the Hype Cycle. And for those who are not familiar with the Hype Cycle, essentially it's a visual representation where we kind of track technologies through kind of like a life cycle in terms of adoption. So in most cases, on the very left side, you'll see that, technologies go through an innovation phase where everybody's excited. There's a lot of proof of concepts being put in together. And then eventually they go through like a peak of inflated expectations kind of curve where more and more success stories come in, but a lot of bad stories also come in play. And then eventually it goes down through what we call as the trough of disillusionment, where a lot of things really don't work out. A lot of companies actually go out of business. A lot of consolidation happens. And eventually in our model, we see kind of a slope of enlightenment where technologies actually start producing some results. And then eventually at the very tail end, we start seeing them as being mainstream technology. So that's kind of the hype cycle. And what we're really seeing in terms of overall, IoT, you could pretty much say that it's still at the peak of expectations right now. There's a lot of activity, there's a lot of buzz, but we haven't really seen it producing true value to everybody. So a lot of, for example, we're seeing a lot of assets being connected and people looking at data and then people trying to do something with data, but the true value of that has not yet been realized. And for several reasons, different folks are trying to kind of really understand what IoT means to them. Our overall kind of read in the market is most folks don't have a very clear set IoT strategy. They're kind of like, okay, what should we do with IoT? Where should we experiment? How can we derive value? That's kind of from a broad market perspective, that's what we're seeing. If you look at the curve out here on the hype cycle, there are some very interesting things going on at the innovation side. For example, security is something that everyone is talking about. We're seeing things such as Internet of Things authentication being something that a lot of people are trying to kind of innovate around. And then if you kind of follow the curve, there's areas such as IT, OT, which is kind of going through the peak of inflated expectations, but not really giving that kind of value that folks are looking for. And then smart lighting is a great example where I think in the next 2 to 3 years is going to move from where it is right now to actually being mainstream. So just a quick kind of snapshot for those who are looking at from a hype perspective, where's IoT and what's happening there. On this next slide, I want to quickly kind of talk through about, we have a 5-level maturity model that we're using with a lot of our clients. So kind of think through what is the journey from an IoT standpoint to them. So what we're really seeing is that most folks have embarked on a journey to kind of connect things, and they're trying to collect data, but they haven't really moved far away from that. So if you look at this model on the very left, level one is where business units really don't have a lot of insights. They're just beginning to kind of deploy things. On level two, there's like collaboration happening between the business units and IT, and they're trying to like look at data coming in there. And then level three is where using that data, they're actually trying to manage and try to make something out of it. And then at level four, they were actually reached a position where there's some competitive actions that can be done using that data. And eventually level five, where differentiated products and services have been released in the market. Now, you could argue that there's some companies who have already gone to level four. Perhaps the usage-based insurance is a good example of that. Some of the things that you see at Disney where they provide you real-time data on their app could be kind of categorized as level four. But overall, if you look at the market, almost everybody is kind of at level two and trying to figure out what is the best and efficient way for them to move to level three and beyond. Moving on to the next slide, a lot of folks keep asking us, so what's going to happen in 2018? Some people from our company send out a survey to over 2,000 different companies to kind of understand what are you guys doing internally from IoT perspective, what are you doing externally in terms of initiatives, and kind of the answer that we got back was almost a large percentage of folks who are looking at external kind of facing initiatives are really just trying to connect products and make them smart versus doing anything else. And then from an internal perspective, it was predominantly about optimizing operations. So how can we use existing IoT technologies to kind of help improve operations and so on and forth. So that was just, I thought it would be interesting to kind of just get a snapshot of where the real value is probably going to be in 2018. Moving on to the next part of the question, which is around challenges. So what are the true challenges for adoption? And we talk a lot about product development. We talk a lot about cool solutions. When it comes to adoption, there's really an organizational element that also needs to be thought through. A lot of these companies who want to embark on an IoT journey are not necessarily geared up organizationally for that. In the traditional software world, you have the business units, you have an IT group, they collaborate, they work together, and they come up with solutions. But with IoT, there's a third circle that's in play, what we call their OT or engineering folks. And the reality is that many companies do not have that set up. You might see that engineering is there in several organizations, but several other organizations do not have them. So there's a need to kind of create new job roles, new structures, and a new setup just to make IoT successful. So collaboration between three different distinct kinds of organizations becomes very important, even when trying to embark on an IoT initiative. This next slide here is it's a little bit of an eye chart, but kind of want to give you the perspective of when you talk about IoT, you need to kind of think about it from an end-to-end solution standpoint. So if you are going to be adopting a solution, one of the challenges that most organizations are facing today is that there is no one vendor who has an end-to-end solution. There's, we have vendors across from on the IoT endpoint side, through the edge platform side, to the platform, to the IoT platform hub side. There's multiple vendors. So if somebody does want to come up with a solution, it's fairly complex for them to now have to deal with 3, 4, 5 different vendors just to get one solution in place. So how do you deal with that? So a lot of organizations are kind of being a little reserved about getting together and deploying some of these solutions. So that's kind of the messaging out here. Just to sum up from a challenges standpoint, what I mentioned earlier, there is no off-the-shelf IoT project. Almost every single IoT project at this point is a customizable project or a custom project where multiple players need to be put in place and multiple solutioning aspects need to be thought through. And this automatically brings a lot of challenges to organizations in terms of what do you do when you don't have standards that's already put in place, which means you need to have some kind of interim governance process or interim policies that you need to think about in place to kind of deal with that situation. So a lot of CIOs come to us and tell us that our typical way when we buy solutions is that we look for products and vendors, who's got a large install base, who's been around for 4 or 5 years. Well, IoT as a concept has matured for a long time, but a lot of these companies are producing products in different parts of the cycle that you saw earlier, haven't been in place for a long time. So how do you deal with that situation? So net-net, there's a lot of work for CIOs to think through to kind of change their organization to be able to adapt and embark on the IoT journey. So that was the summary for this one here. The last bit I think that we want to cover about is what are some of the new jobs that's being created because of IoT. So we're seeing that at least there's 6 broad categories of jobs that's coming into play. On the left-hand side, as you see there, you have your traditional IT roles that is in play today in most organizations. And then if you look at the stack out here, the very top, you see a lot of analytic skills, business process skills, integration, operations. Those kind of skills are going to come in play, specifically aligned a little bit more towards IoT. But the really new add-ons is the bottom 2, where you see device management, connectivity, and digital security and privacy. These are 2 really, really new areas that are going to be quite in demand, because a lot of the organizations, as I had mentioned in one of the slides earlier, the engineering part, the OT part, that is still a new development in play, and a lot of companies are trying to figure out how they can hire the right skills to kind of fill in those roles. So with that, I'm going to end my piece and let my colleagues here, panelists, speak. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so please hold the questions after all the presentation are given. So with that, please welcome Douglas.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Hopefully you're not in a coma after lunch. Have some energy. Thank you, Renil, for a fantastic presentation. I think it set the horizon, kind of what we're facing, a number of challenges. I'll try to be very specific in an area which builds on that. Let's talk about if IoT is hype once again. And several years ago, the research organization Trend One put forth a presentation which described not just the current IoT phenomenon, but kind of a longer-term view. As Tim Berners-Lee has said, it's a 25-year, the internet's been around 25, 27 years from part of his seminal papers, and beyond that. And we're part of a journey going over time. So we really had a start and an evolution which will continue. At the beginning, we're talking about simply the internet of very basic things. And my eyes aren't very good anymore, so I can have you read the bottom part there. As we go more to a more advanced level, we go away from the internet of basic things to the internet of people, which is where we are now, Web 1, Web 1.0, Web 2.0. And the idea that we can morph into the Internet of Things is very doable based on that base that we've set as a foundation. In the future, we could integrate the Internet of Things with the Internet of Thought, or the Web of Thought. So it becomes a continuum that we need to look at here, I think. And so the trends of the conversations of trillion-dollar numbers are meaningless to an individual, but when you think about the long-term or average lifespan, less than 100 years, we're going to be seeing this for a long time. What's the next slide here? Yeah. Let's talk about challenges to IoT adoption. And I'm going to focus on security because at HPE, I focus on cybersecurity. It's an area that I know, and we have other kinds of challenges, including shared standards and infrastructure, and data control and access. But security is kind of a topical. We're at a topical moment for security because a lot of it can't be done without some kind of sense of assurance that things are going to be private. And we can't build the wall higher anymore. The well-funded armies of hackers are coming. We have to respond more quickly. That's been the takeaway. So let's discuss how to secure the IoT in context of thinking about employment opportunities, which will come next. So we can do three things to secure the IoT in a very basic way. We can secure the device, we can secure the connection, and we can secure the cloud or app, or both, which is useful. And I think that for securing the device, first of all, you have to understand that the attack surface is massively increased by all the vectors that are shown by, 20 billion sensors, 100 billion sensors. And common attacks in the IoT include man in the middle, which is designed to interrupt and breach communications when the sender doesn't really know who the receiver is and whether the receiver is legitimate. Data and identity theft, from our smart devices, our Fitbit. So much data can be collected that personally identifiable information can allow for identity theft more easily. And DOS attacks may not be malicious, but we're talking about impacts to business operation, brand value, and certainly capitalization. So all of these attacks, these are the three big ones, are really need to be addressed with devices. And the device needs to be able to be intelligent enough to handle the security authentication. And we can process the information locally at the edge, which gives a big advantage to the device. It gives a security advantage in the sense that it's not as much information to process. So what do we do next? We secure the connection. After securing the device, securing the connection. And the key here is most of the IoT is wireless or will be wireless. If you have an endpoint on a wellhead somewhere in Texas Panhandle, you need to be able to, you're not going to wire that. So those field devices typically don't have patching, reconfiguration, security policy, and updates in old operating systems. So how do we secure that remote sensor? It's a difficult question. So you secure the device, secure the communication, and I think we have many standards around this: 802, IEEE, 802, and Wi-Fi, and standards are evolving, and we need to coalesce those. And finally, we secure the cloud and apps. And many of you have more experience around this part of the equation, security. You back up frequently, use strong passwords, antivirus, and I think key in this is that we make sure that identity management, authentication, and encryption are very robust. And all of this will allow together to allow us to do serious analytics. And as Renil mentioned, we really have device management as a key here. So those are the security issues that we really see on a daily basis, IoT. It's a broad brush. But let's examine how those relate to the employment opportunities. We can talk more about use cases, maybe through the panel as we get questions. So really, in terms of job opportunities for young people and people mature in their careers, we're talking about technical skills and management skills, obviously, and bridging the chasm between what we term the chief risk officer and the chief technology officer. Often they don't speak the same languages, and we complicate that with operational technology. So one example of this from a technical skills perspective, if you secure the device, we want to consider chip design, PLC controller design, programmable logic controllers. Those are the heart and soul of the IoT. And we need, obviously, engineers and architects who understand this. We have many designations which are useful: CISSP, GICSP, CISM. And for those who aren't familiar with these designations, it's the Certified Information Security Manager, Certified Information Systems Security Professional, and the Global Industrial Cybersecurity Professional. Those things, those organizations, SANS, ISACA, and ISC really help in that regard. As we secure the connection, we're going to be thinking about identity and access management much and networking. And so the network starts with authentication, with username and password. It moves on to firewalls. And security infrastructure is important, working together to mitigate malicious attacks, to IDS, intrusion detection devices, IPS, prevention devices, firewalls, routers, things like that, some arcane things that we in security like to talk about. And finally, to secure the cloud, many of these same skills apply, including encryption, identity management. And I think that a growing trend, a growing interesting area, and one I've been involved in is SIM, Security Incident and Event Management, which can be combined with a SOC, a Security Operations Center. So you can imagine this room, and we set these up around the world all the time at HPE, monitoring anomalies, monitoring traffic, and eventually getting good enough to hunt for bad actors, hackers that are coming into your corporate system. So the SIM tools are more mature than a lot of the other IoT tools, but they provide, through the presentation layer, a dashboard to allow people to really hunt specific things. And finally, the management skills that are necessary include strategists and change journey managers, things like that. People with more experience, perhaps, that have been engineers and moved on. And I think that the important part here is we're talking about engagements as well as process. From an engagement perspective, assessing risk postures, very important. Finally, inventorying assets, risks, and protection, and then quantifying those risks, reporting to the board as we have done at HPE. And finally, in process, we're talking about making sure that governance is set up, roles and responsibilities, and thinking about the information flows in and outside of an organization. Eventually, everything may be connected to the Internet of Things, so consider those information flows. And as has been mentioned, does your company have the culture to succeed in this area? Is this something you should take a look at, securing your IoT and making and productizing it in many ways? So as we move forward, I think that bridging the chasm between this chief risk officer, who can typically report risk on an anecdotal basis and hopefully a quantifiable basis to the CEO and the board, that conversation has to then weed its way to the technical officers who can provide information to supply the conversation. So right now, these organizations are really balkanized in their understanding of cybersecurity. But I think this is a massive barrier to adoption of IoT because corporate firewalls and privacy have to be respected for capitalization of nothing else. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Alan?
Yes.
Please. Yeah. Try.
Okay, I shall try and keep mine short, and then you can have some questions for us later on before we get to the next session. There we go. So, is it a hype or not? I thought was a question I should first answer because, ultimately, if it's all hype, then it's maybe not a good career opportunity. And ultimately, and I think it was mentioned in the Gartner Hype Cycle, which I think is well recognized in the space. Yes, a lot of it is hype. And as a person who's worked in IoT before it was called IoT, that is the nature of these beasts as they go through the cycle of technology. I would argue fairly passionately that almost all the scenarios you see out there in any of these IoT spaces are not the Internet of Things. They are simply connected things. And we do not have, in any case, an Internet of Things. Internetworking of things is atrocious. There are a zillion different frameworks, a zillion different security standards, a zillion different clouds, analytics platforms, you name it. There are at least 100 I could probably list off. And because of that, we basically have connected things, not the Internet of Things. And yeah, sure, we'd love to have the Internet of Things and the Internet connecting all of it to pieces, but today we do not have that. And I think we need to accept that's the case. But at the same time, as every cloud has a silver lining, that's an opportunity. That means nobody has created the Internet of Things yet. People are making connected stuff. It's good. Connecting stuff is important. I've done that on millions of devices myself. But having the Internet of Things is an opportunity that is yet met. And in the same way that, Tim Berners-Lee created the web on top of the Internet, and that was a cascade before the web existed, there were plenty of rubbish ways of getting information. There were not very much information in them, but not as good. But once the actual thing came up and it was internet-worked, it was great, and we all know it was great. So I'm arguing that that's missing, and we need to get into that, and that's a great opportunity. Now, on the same line, I want to cut back, I think it was to the second presenter's, maybe the first presenter's presentation. There are many needs in those spaces. Privacy, security, analytics, applications, all those bits and pieces. Well, actually, we need those, even if you're not an Internet of Things scenario. If you're a large web developer, a web portal, like you're a Google or something like that, you've got to have privacy and security. You've got to have applications and analytics and all those kind of good things. What we do miss, though, are people with those skills in this thing space, right? And the challenge there, of course, is that the thing space is ill-defined, as I just described. So people typically have those skills perhaps in the connected device space, and then perhaps in the traditional cloud case, and then the two are kind of linked together somehow. But they're not really internet-work. So again, there's a little bit of an opportunity there, I would say, to kind of do what we all dream we would like to do, but doesn't exist yet. And my last point on this slide is that actually, if you think about it, many of the scenarios that we know and love in Internet of Things have existed for years. Factories have had connected systems for years. They were called SCADA systems way back when. You may not have heard of that, but they had connected factories. Now, they were not IP, they didn't know the bit, but they connected them up. The same is true of connected car. GM has sold connected cars for over 20 years. It's not a use case. Its use case has existed for a long time. But we're getting to the point now where critical mass is affecting that connectivity in many markets. And so we should ask ourselves not some cool new use case, because you've got to bear in mind the use cases are probably not new, but how to do them right. And if you're going to do that, you should build upon the shoulders of giants. So that means don't go making a new framework or a new security system. Look at the ones that are out there and make them better. Because without doing that, and particularly without doing that with things like open source and other flexible licensing policies, we'll stay in this state for quite a while. And it will handicap, I believe, the space and limit the opportunities that exist in this space for careers. So limited interoperability, lack of common layers, and limited standards. Actually, limited standards is not correct. One of the nice things about standards in this space is there are plenty to choose from. But that makes them not standard. So what we really need is that to kill itself out and one or two to succeed. Okay, that was my first slide. Second slide. So if that didn't sound challenging enough, I've got a few more challenges for you, just to kind of make sure we were clear. So security in almost all the Internet of Things scenarios you see out there, perhaps a little bit less so in the internet, industrial Internet of Things and connected car, but certainly any consumer application, security is non-existent pretty much. You have to sign into your app and you have an account, but the actual sensors on your window brake sensor in your security system is not heavily secured into the rest of the world, and that's a big problem. And where it does exist, it has to be bridged. And anybody who's lived in security knows that bridging is bad when it comes to security. It's typically a weak point, and so we've got to stop that. And the other element, this is particularly true in consumer, but it's true in connected car and industrial Internet things too, it costs a lot of money. If you want to make a factory and connect up a bunch more, or that remote oil sensor, it costs a lot of money. Same is true for your house. Perhaps for Silicon Valley types, it's relatively cheap by comparison to housing, etc. But for most people, spending hundreds of dollars to make your thermostat turn on remotely is a waste of money, and it takes a lot of money. So that's a problem. So opportunities. I'm characterizing there to be two opportunities here. One, which I'm going to argue, even though I've worked in it for many years, is the consumer side of Internet of Things. And the reason I'm downplaying that is the commercial value is relatively small. You know, great, I can make a light turn on. Man, great, how much am I willing to pay for that? But actually in an industrial use case, you can actually relatively easily save a lot of money by connecting things up. And that's why it's been done for many years, and it's definitely expanding up. So if you were to get into this space, I would go much more on the industrial Internet of Things side, or other areas where there's money, agricultural variations too. And you know, I think you need to make sure that you worry about what has gone before, and not just walk in and say, okay, agriculture, Internet of Things, that's an empty field, let's go make something new. Actually, it's been around for a while. And with that, I shall hand over.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really great insights from all our speakers. Because we don't have too much time, I'm just going to open now to questions. So if you have any questions,